Good. It's good to have you on this mini series on remote work. And I'm really excited to hear your point of view because you are a collaboration architect at Radical Inclusion, where you help companies design virtual workplaces and workflows to effectively work together remotely.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, that's true. That's correct. Thanks for having me.
Great, good. So tell us, you're an expert in this, right? How to work remotely, how to create engagement between people remotely, how to create these human interactions. So what's key to having meaningful interactions online?
I mean, in the end, I think it's what's key to having meaningful interactions anywhere, right? It's establishing human connection with other people, and I think where we are often falling short in when we move from primarily in-person interaction to remote or distributed interaction, is that we tend to forget that. Meaningful human connection is more than just talking about work and talking about tasks and getting stuff done together, but that it involves getting to know the person, understanding where they're coming from, knowing what's going on in their world, so I can understand whether they're in a bad mood because the weather is bad where they're at and not because they have a problem with me, for example. So being aware of context, being aware of having emotional intelligence and leveraging that in a conversation. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to emphasize more because they don't come as natural in the virtual setting as they might come in in-person settings.
Yeah, this human and kind of context side, I think, is crucial. You're right, offline and online. At the same time, I feel like online we have less opportunity to have these kind of informal chats, that give us context on what's happening with the person's life. And especially, I feel like we have short amount of times, like meetings that are specifically for one thing and we need to get to the point, and we have these 45 minutes to work on this, and so there isn't much place for these interactions to happen. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is not much space because we don't consciously make that space. I think where it becomes really clear is when we do online workshops or conferences. I facilitate a lot of these, a lot of the events like that, and what I notice is that organizers usually have really clear what they want in terms of the content. What presentations have to happen, what discussions have to occur. Sometimes they even think about, that's not always there, but sometimes they even think about who has to be there, whose opinion do we need, but it's all around the content. And they don't really think about what's the type of experience my audience or my participants need so they can take the types of decisions I want them to take. And I think that comes from that being sort of a natural thing in the in-person setting. We know there's going to be coffee break where people mingle. We know there's going to be maybe a conference dinner where I can make something special. I can have sort of like a little side event that is a social hour, and it doesn't cost me a lot of extra organizing. A lot of facilitators are very comfortable. In-person facilitators are very comfortable feeling the room and seeing how do I have to influence them. Some people are not really in the process anymore. I need to switch the energy. And so those kinds of senses we don't have as developed in the online world. And so we can't react as spontaneously. And some of the things we just can't do spontaneously, like, coffee breaks in the virtual world means everybody just shuts off their camera, does an email or picks up a coffee and then sits back down to go back into content discussion. So we have to make space, conscious space in those interactions. And the same goes for teams. You have to make space for informal moments, for social conversation, have a check-in, for example, at the beginning of each meeting that might cost you 5 minutes to go around the room and ask people, how are you? That goes a long way of understanding where are they at, what's going on their end that might affect how they feel, how productive they are that day, how creative they can be, etc.
Yeah.
So it's about being explicit about it and consciously doing something with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And in a way, overcoming the idea that we're losing time by not talking about work specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good.
Exactly.
So you work a lot with leaders in that sense, right? Leaders are the people who can influence this kind of change of mindset. How has their role changed?
One of the things that I believe the introduction of remote tools and remote ways of working do in our organizations is that it forces teams to be more self-organized and more self-governed. And I think those leaders who are used to doing management by looking over the shoulder, or knowing always where everybody is, and sort of being able to tap into what they're doing because they've established that type of culture, they have to change quite a bit. Because if I'm not able to establish a trustworthy connection with my employee, and that means also giving them more autonomy than I might have given beforehand, that creates distance, and distance is punished with more distance. So if I'm distant from my employee and I want them to do something, it's really easy for them to just say, I didn't see your email, or there was a problem with my internet connection or something, and I can't do anything about that. So it's really much more about establishing the right connection with my people and making sure that they are that they trust, that there's a trusting relationship between us, then controlling whether they're doing things right. And so it's a shift, I think, from control to trust.
Yeah, it's not always easy, I find, even if with leaders who have the best intentions. What can you do to build
and
this?
it actually, just to add to that, it's not only for the leaders difficult, because it also requires the team members, the subordinates to step up and take responsibility for things that they didn't have to take responsibility before. So there is a point of when leaders say, but I can't just, they're not ready. I think partly it's because they don't trust that the people aren't ready, so that you can go much further. A lot of teams can go much further than they think, or a lot of leaders can go much further than they think. But there is a point of saying, can everybody in the team, are they self-organized and self-directed enough? Are they taking the responsibility they need to take for the stuff they need, or do they need somebody still to tell them, this is what you do today, next thing what you do tomorrow, etc. So there is a shift there on both sides, not just on the leader side.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. For sure, the leader has a role of creating the right space, but there is a mindset shift in the individual contributor as well that needs to take on ownership, right, of his work. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so there's another theme that comes to my mind as well here is communication, right? Because in the end, and so it's something, to be honest, that I am struggling with as well. It's to build this trust. I know there is trust, but at the same time, there needs to be some kind of clear communication and visibility on what you're doing, without it being controlling, but just sharing, what you're doing, where you're at, so you can get help as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency is essential. The times where information was power are over. No, I mean, you can find the information that you need, even if your colleague doesn't tell you, one way or another. So you might as well just have it all there and put it out for everyone to see. That's one part. The other thing I think is really, well, let me back up and say, a process that I like to go through with clients is have them understand where everybody's coming from. So in intercultural or cross-cultural development, a lot of times these are processes that have been done in the past as well, when people from different cultures have to work together to try and understand where are you coming from, what does punctuality mean, how do we take decisions, etc. And I think now, with teams becoming more and more international, more and more cross-cultural, it's not anymore at 2 or 3 people adapting to the dominant culture. It's everybody understanding everybody. So what we do with clients is go through exercises that help them understand where are people coming from. So am I a big picture thinker, or do I need details? Am I somebody who works really well in the morning, or am I rather an evening person? Do I like to communicate in writing, or do I prefer talking like we are doing now? And so there are a bunch of different dimensions that you can have people assess themselves, and then have a discussion in the team to understand. And often what happens is that people say, that's why we always have trouble, because there's this group in our team who really get drowned when we share too much detail, because they need the helicopter view first before they can deal with the details. And so that's the first part, and then figuring out, so how do we align this? How do we make sure that we get agreements, as opposed to having expectations about each other's behavior? Make real agreements of, this is how we're going to do it in the future. So if we're writing we're writing emails only about these and these things. Everything else happens in a chat app that we have, or it's okay to not respond to messages, and if it's urgent, it has to be marked in a certain way, right? Things like that can be really, really simple and concrete, but that help the team understand what does it actually mean to do this work, to communicate effectively.
Yeah, there's this theme again of being explicit, right? Of being intentional and agreeing on the best way to move forward.
Yes.
And at the same time, what you were saying about people's preference, it takes some self-awareness as well to know,
yes,
oh, I prefer this kind of communication, or I need this kind of things that most of the time we don't necessarily have.
Yeah, and these exercises actually unearth that, right? When somebody's really lost and saying, but I don't know, everything's okay for me. And then you have to dig deeper, right? You have to sort of probe and ask, why is it so hard for you to categorize yourself here? And then also recognizing that, only because 2 people have put their mark, we usually like to do these it's like a little positioning exercise where you draw a line and you say big picture thinker, detailed person, on each of the extremes, and then you ask people to mark where they're at in this continuum. And so you get a visual idea of where the team is. But only because 2 people have marked themselves at the same point doesn't mean they understand, they have the same understanding of that point, right? So you need a discussion to understanding, what does it mean to be right in the middle between those 2? For somebody, it can be a really clear, I need both. And for somebody, it can be, I don't really know, I don't care. So yeah, you can help with that self-awareness is, I guess, what I'm trying to sell in those discussions.
Yeah. And maybe more than ever, it is important to actually take time out to do these exercises with the team if we want to set the right kind of foundations to move forward, right? And this new way of working, or next way of working, right?
Also considering that in most companies, there's not the stable team anymore, right? The notion of the team, I think, is shifting a lot with remote work towards more loosely coupled groups of people who work together on different projects. And again, as like you said earlier, it's to not perceive that as a waste of time. We only have a 3-week project. Why do we need to spend a 2-hour meeting on getting aligned and making agreements, right? Let's get started and do the work. But it just saves so much time later on. And if you do it regularly, those types of alignments, they become fast things, because people already know each other. They already know the exercises. So it's really just a matter of checking in and saying, you know, has something changed? Are we still good? Do we need, and you can build these agreements over time. What I really like, organizations are starting to adopt the organizational gifts. You know, like you have GitHub for code, where you have a master code, and then you can either fork or you can improve the master code, and when it's approved, it gets copied into. People are doing that for internal procedures now. So they're actually publishing, some of them are publishing online saying, this is how we run, this is how our workflow, this is what works for us in terms of policies, in terms of agreements. And then as they move forward, they can adapt that, right? It's not a policy set in stone that then starts to become a burden or a hindrance, but it becomes an evolving document,
right? Yeah.
That every team can adapt, and there's already something that you can build off of.
And it's public, I guess, so everyone can see
exactly.
and understand.
Yeah.
Good. Wow, amazing.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Stephan. Loved our conversation. Lots of really interesting topics that I'm sure we'll have other occasions to.
Seems like we opened
expand.
a lot of boxes, and now we need to more conversations. Great.
Exactly, more conversations to come. Thank you, Stephan, again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was great.